What happened in the next 30 seconds left Steve Bannon completely speechless for the first time in his political career. Representative Jasmine Crockett had just unveiled evidence that obliterated his entire argument on live television. This was no ordinary political debate. It was the moment a young black congresswoman from Texas dismantled a seasoned political strategist in front of millions. The studio lights burned brightly on the CNN stage in Atlanta, Georgia, as two of America's most polarizing figures braced for a confrontation that would echo through the political landscape. Bannon, with his disheveled suit and trademark smirk, believed he was about to dominate yet another inexperienced Democrat. He had no inkling he was stepping into a meticulously laid trap. The air crackled with tension as the cameras began rolling. Bannon sat across from Crockett, his fingers tapping restlessly on the polished table, that familiar arrogant grin plastered across his face. He'd built a career on bending narratives, dismantling opponents with half-truths and bluster. Tonight, he thought, would be no different. But Crockett's eyes told a different story. Sharp, focused, the gaze of a prosecutor who'd already won the case in her mind. Her folder brimmed with documents, her notes precise, her strategy airtight. While Bannon rehearsed his usual theatrics, Crockett was armed with facts, statistics, and legal precedents, leaving no room for his typical evasions. The CNN host, Michael Sanders, felt the electricity in the room. This wasn't going to be a standard panel discussion. Something monumental was brewing, and everyone in the studio sensed it. The audience leaned forward, breaths held. Camera operators adjusted their angles. Even the production assistants paused, eyes fixed on the stage. None of them could have predicted they were about to witness a political takedown for the ages, a moment that would be replayed millions of times, dissected by analysts, and remembered as the night Steve Bannon's reputation was shattered by a woman who refused to be cowed. To grasp why this clash was so explosive, you must understand who these two figures are and what they represent. Representative Jasmine Crockett embodies everything Steve Bannon dreads about America's evolving political tide. At 43, this former public defender from Texas has emerged as one of Congress's fiercest voices, never shying from a fight, always armed with evidence. Her path to Washington wasn't lined with elite connections or inherited wealth. Raised in St. Louis in a working-class family, Crockett learned early that education and grit were her only tickets to success. Her mother, a nurse, worked grueling double shifts. Her father, a union electrician, taught her to honor the struggles of working people. She juggled 2 jobs through college, maintaining a perfect 4.0 GPA. Law school at the University of Houston was even tougher. Days spent studying, nights at a legal aid clinic, helping those the system overlooked. Crockett could have chased a lucrative corporate law career. Instead, she chose public defense, fighting in courtrooms for those society had discarded. Teenagers who'd stumbled, single mothers facing eviction, workers trapped in a justice system that seemed to punish poverty itself. For over a decade, she built a reputation as a relentless advocate, defending anyone, regardless of their means. Her leap into politics felt inevitable. After seeing broken policies harm her clients, she ran for the Texas State House, winning through tireless door-knocking and community meetings. No consultants, no big donors, just grassroots determination. When she set her sights on Congress, the establishment dismissed her as a young black woman without pedigree. They underestimated her. Powered by small donations and volunteers, teachers, nurses, mechanics, retirees, Crockett's campaign proved them wrong. On the other side sat Steve Bannon, 71, a former investment banker turned political provocateur. Known for orchestrating divisive campaigns and spreading conspiracy theories, Bannon represents an old guard of manipulation. His journey diverged sharply from Crockett's. Born into a middle-class Virginia family, he climbed the ranks of American capitalism with cunning. After Georgetown and Harvard Business School, he thrived at Goldman Sachs, amassing wealth through deals that often hurt the very working families he later claimed to champion. His shift to media wasn't about public service but power. At his media outlet, he perfected manufactured outrage, turning debates into cultural battlegrounds. Fear and division, he knew, outshone hope and unity. When a certain political figure rose, Bannon seized the chance to wield real influence, shaping policies that mirrored his worldview of constant threats, foreign and domestic. This clash wasn't just about two people. It was a battle for the soul of American discourse. Bannon's world thrived on alternative facts, divisive rhetoric, and outrage designed to distract from accountability. Crockett's approach, direct, evidence-based, rooted in service, represented a new generation unwilling to bow to intimidation. The stakes were immense. For months, Bannon had peddled false claims about Democratic policies on conservative airwaves, targeting young Congresswomen of color with venomous rhetoric. His playbook relied on personal attacks and conspiracies to derail policy discussions. If he could make it about Crockett's age, race, or gender, he could dodge her message. It had worked before until tonight. Crockett, a seasoned prosecutor, knew bullies like Bannon. She'd spent weeks studying not just policy, but his record, his contradictions. When CNN invited her to debate him, her staff warned he'd make it personal. She welcomed the challenge. The network billed it as a discussion on immigration and border security, but everyone knew it was a broader war over truth and power. Bannon arrived with his usual arsenal: interruptions, deflections, attacks. Crockett brought something stronger: the truth, backed by documents, data, and a prosecutor's precision. The first sign Bannon was in trouble came during opening statements. He launched into a tirade about shadowy elites ruining America, gesturing wildly, voice booming. Crockett sat calmly, taking meticulous notes, her face unreadable. She wasn't reacting to his bait or matching his volume. She was dissecting him like a lawyer studying a witness. Michael Sanders struggled to rein in Bannon's monologue, which ran long. The host sensed something different tonight, an intensity beyond the usual debates. Crockett's silence was unnerving, a quiet storm waiting to unleash. Representative Crockett, Sanders finally interjected. Mr. Bannon claims your policies harm American workers and threaten security. Your response? Bannon leaned forward, sneering, ready to pounce. Look, Michael, he cut in, voice dripping with condescension. This is what I'm talking about. These young Democrats waltz into Washington with no real-world experience, just parroting progressive scripts. Representative Crockett's been in Congress, a few years, and she thinks she's cracked the code on complex issues people like me have tackled for decades. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Bannon was hitting familiar notes, condescending, laced with subtle jabs at her race and gender. A young black woman, his tone implied, couldn't possibly match his intellect or experience. But Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't snap back or take the bait. She made a note, her expression calm, almost amused. Mr. Bannon, she said, her voice clear, slicing through his bluster, you didn't answer Michael's policy question. You attacked me instead. Is that because you can't defend your positions with facts, or because you think viewers don't deserve a real policy discussion? The challenge hung in the air. Bannon's smirk flickered. He wasn't used to opponents staying laser-focused on substance. His strategy thrived on emotional reactions, but Crockett refused to play along. He scrambled to recover, doubling down. Facts, he scoffed, gesturing theatrically. You want facts, Congresswoman? Your party's policies have gutted cities, spiked crime, opened borders to chaos, and crushed working families. Those are the facts Americans care about. The studio tension surged. Cameras zoomed in, sensing the breaking point. Bannon's voice grew louder, his hands waving, believing he was dominating. He didn't see Crockett letting him dig deeper, piling up claims she was ready to dismantle. Interesting, Crockett replied, her tone steady, professional. You mentioned crime and borders. Are you sure you want to go there, Mr. Bannon? I have official government data here that might surprise our viewers. For the first time, Bannon's confidence wavered. Her tone wasn't bluffing. It carried the weight of someone holding a winning hand. But his pride wouldn't let him retreat. Bring it on, he said, arms wide, voice bold but eyes uncertain. I've dealt with liberal spin for years. You cherry-pick numbers, twist them to fit your story, and ignore reality. The trap was sprung. By dismissing her evidence sight unseen, Bannon looked arrogant, scared. His "you people" jab betrayed his biases, and his blanket rejection of data set him up for ruin. What came next would haunt him for months. Crockett reached into her folder with deliberate calm, pulling out a thick stack of documents. These weren't just papers. They were a meticulously curated arsenal. FBI crime statistics, Department of Justice reports, economic data from bipartisan sources, and immigration records from multiple federal agencies. The studio lights glinted off the crisp pages as she arranged them before her, each one a weapon in her prosecutorial arsenal. Bannon's bravado faltered, his eyes narrowing as he sensed the shift. The audience held its breath, the air heavy with anticipation. "Mr. Bannon," Crockett began, her voice steady, commanding, like a lawyer addressing a jury. "You claim Democratic policies drive up crime. But according to FBI data from the past 2 years, compiled under both Republican and Democratic administrations, 9 of the 10 states with the highest murder rates are led by Republican governors." Shall I read the list for our viewers? The studio fell silent. The faint hum of air conditioning was the only sound as Bannon's face flushed, a red tide creeping up his neck. He hadn't expected this, a direct, data-driven assault on his core narrative. He'd walked into the debate anticipating emotional outbursts or vague talking points he could easily deflect. Instead, Crockett was wielding verifiable facts with surgical precision. The audience leaned forward, some whispering to each other, others gripping their seats. Furthermore, Crockett pressed on, not giving him a moment to regroup. The states with the lowest crime rates, Massachusetts, Vermont, Maine, Connecticut, are all led by Democratic governors who've implemented the very policies you say fuel crime. How do you square your claims with this official data? Bannon's usual swagger evaporated. He shifted in his seat, hands clenching the table's edge. That's cherry-picking, he stammered, his voice lacking its earlier bite. You can twist numbers to say anything. Crime rates have dozens of factors, socioeconomic, historical. Cherry-picking. Crockett cut in, her eyebrow raised, her tone laced with disbelief. These are FBI uniform crime reports, Mr. Bannon. The same data used by the previous administration, your administration, to set policy. Are you saying they relied on faulty numbers? That the FBI, under a director appointed by your allies, fabricated statistics? The trap snapped shut. Bannon's attack on the data had backfired, forcing him to question the credibility of his own political allies. His mouth opened, then closed, as he scrambled for a response. The audience sensed his discomfort, their murmurs growing louder. Camera operators zoomed in, capturing the sweat beading on his forehead. Crockett's calm, unrelenting focus was unraveling him, piece by piece. "And let's talk about economic policy," she continued smoothly, pulling another set of documents from her stack. "You've built a career claiming conservative policies create wealth while progressive ones destroy it. But the numbers tell a different story, don't they?" She held up a report, her eyes locking onto Bannon's. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, 8 of the 10 poorest states in America are run by Republican governors. 7 of the 10 wealthiest? Democratic governors. Care to explain that contradiction? Bannon was visibly rattled now, his hands fidgeting, his earlier smirk replaced by a grimace. "You're twisting the data," he said weakly, his voice hollow. "Economic development's complex. There are other factors, trade policies, global markets. Of course it's complex," Crockett agreed, her tone almost generous, as if she were indulging a struggling student. "That's why it requires studying data, analyzing trends, and making decisions based on evidence, not slogans. Wouldn't you agree, Mr. Bannon? Or do you prefer sound bites over substance?" The audience erupted in murmurs, some nodding, others whispering excitedly. This wasn't the usual cable news shouting match. It was a masterclass in dismantling an opponent with preparation and precision. Even those who disagreed with Crockett's politics couldn't deny the skill on display. Michael Sanders, the host, tried to interject, sensing Bannon was drowning. "Mr. Bannon, would you like to respond to the economic data?" Bannon seized the lifeline, leaning forward with forced confidence. "Look, Michael, numbers are one thing, but people feel the economy in their daily lives. They see jobs disappearing, prices rising, borders unsecured. That's the reality, not some government report." Crockett didn't miss a beat. "Reality?" she asked, her voice sharp but controlled. "Let's talk reality then. You've made claims about border security tonight. Let's examine those." She pulled out another document, this one stamped with the seal of the Department of Homeland Security. According to federal immigration data, border apprehensions have decreased by 20% in states with Democratic-led initiatives that focus on community-based enforcement rather than militarization. Meanwhile, states following your advocated policies, walls, mass detentions, report higher rates of illegal crossings. How do you reconcile that with your reality? Bannon's face was a mask of frustration. He tried to interrupt, but Crockett's voice cut through like a blade. "I'm not finished, Mr. Bannon. You've also claimed tonight that Democratic policies harm workers. But the data shows that states with progressive labor laws, higher minimum wages, stronger unions, have lower unemployment and higher median incomes than states following your economic playbook. Would you like me to cite the specific figures?" The studio was electric now, the tension palpable. Bannon's usual tactics, deflection, interruption, outrage, were useless against Crockett's relentless facts. Every time he tried to pivot, she dragged him back to the evidence. The audience was captivated, some jotting notes, others filming with their phones. Even the production crew, usually detached, watched with wide eyes. "Enough with the statistics." Bannon snapped, his voice rising, a desperate edge creeping in. "The American people don't need a lecture from some rookie congresswoman. They know what's happening: crime, chaos, economic ruin. Your party's to blame, and no fancy folder changes that." The outburst was a mistake, and Crockett seized it. "Rookie," she said, her voice calm but laced with steel, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Since you want to make this about experience, Mr. Bannon, let's compare our records. You've questioned my qualifications tonight, so let's have an honest conversation about who's actually served the public." Bannon's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. He sensed the ground shifting beneath him, but it was too late. Crockett was ready to deliver the blow that would define this confrontation. She leaned forward, her presence commanding the room, her voice steady but carrying an edge that made everyone sit up straighter. "In my 3 years in Congress," she began, "I've helped pass infrastructure bills creating thousands of jobs in Texas. Real jobs, building roads, bridges, broadband for families. I've fought for community health centers, securing funding to provide care for the uninsured. I've worked on criminal justice reforms that reduce recidivism, giving people second chances. I've pushed for affordable childcare so parents don't have to choose between work and family." Her voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. "That's my record of service, Mr. Bannon. What's yours?" The silence was deafening. Bannon's hands trembled slightly, his earlier bravado crumbling. He opened his mouth to respond, but Crockett wasn't done. She pulled out another document, her movements deliberate, her gaze unyielding. "Let's talk about your recent contributions to public service," she said, her tone now carrying a quiet intensity that sent a chill through the room. "A few years ago, you were convicted of contempt of Congress for defying a subpoena tied to an investigation into a major political event. You were sentenced to 4 months in federal prison and fined thousands. Is it the kind of service you're proud of?" The studio was a tomb. Even the camera operators froze, sensing history unfolding. Bannon's face drained of color, his usual arsenal of quips and deflections useless. Crockett's voice pressed on, relentless but composed. "And let's not forget your arrest for fraud and money laundering tied to a crowdfunding campaign, where you allegedly misled thousands of supporters, pocketing millions meant for a border project. Those charges were only dropped because of a presidential pardon, but you're still facing state charges in New York. charges no president can touch. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. The audience was spellbound, some gasping, others nodding. Bannon's mouth moved, but no sound emerged. For the first time in his career, the master of spin was cornered, his usual tricks neutralized by a woman armed with nothing but the truth. The silence in the CNN studio was suffocating. Steve Bannon, the man who thrived on chaos and confrontation, sat frozen, his face a shifting canvas of shock and fury. Representative Jasmine Crockett had just laid bare his record: convictions, fraud allegations, pardons. Each fact a hammer strike to his carefully crafted image. The audience, the crew, even host Michael Sanders watched in stunned silence as Crockett prepared her final move. She wasn't just winning a debate. She was dismantling a legend, piece by meticulously researched piece. Crockett leaned forward slightly, her voice steady, but now carrying a quiet fire that commanded the room. "Mr. Bannon," she said, her eyes locked on his, "since you've made this about qualifications and who's fit to serve, let's dig deeper into our backgrounds. I think the American people deserve to know exactly who they're hearing from tonight." Her words were calm, deliberate, but the steel beneath them cut through the air like a blade. Bannon's hands gripped the table, his knuckles whitening. He tried to interject, his voice hoarse. "You're just—" But Crockett raised a hand, polite but firm, silencing him without raising her voice. "I'm not finished," she said, her tone unyielding. "Let me tell you what I've done with my career, Mr. Bannon. Before Congress, I spent over a decade as a public defender in Texas. I fought for people the system ignored. Kids who made mistakes, families facing eviction, workers crushed by a justice system that punishes poverty. I worked late nights at legal aid clinics, helping people who couldn't afford a lawyer navigate a world stacked against them. I held police accountable for misconduct, ensured fair trials, and gave a voice to those who had none." Her voice grew stronger, filled with the passion of someone who'd lived her principles. "I worked my way through law school, raising a family, supporting my parents, all while keeping a 4.0 GPA. I didn't have wealth or connections. I had grit, determination, and a commitment to serve. As a state legislator, I fought for better schools, affordable health care, and workers' rights. Now, in Congress, I'm pushing policies that create jobs, expand child care, and reform a broken system. That's my record, Mr. Bannon. That's what service looks like." The audience was riveted, some nodding, others wiping tears. Crockett wasn't just listing accomplishments. She was painting a picture of a life dedicated to others. Her words carried weight, not from theatrics, but from truth. She turned her gaze back to Bannon, who sat slumped, his earlier bravado a distant memory. "Now, let's talk about your record," she said, her voice sharpening, each word a precise strike. "You spent years at Goldman Sachs, making millions on deals that tanked the economy in 2008. Families lost homes, jobs, savings, while you profited. That's not service. That's exploitation." Bannon's face reddened, his mouth opening, but no words came. Crockett pressed on, pulling another document from her folder. "Then you ran a media empire, peddling conspiracy theories, stoking division, and profiting off fear. You turned neighbors against neighbors, made millions by inflaming anger instead of solving problems. And most recently, you defrauded the very supporters you claim to represent, taking their money under false pretenses for a project that never materialized. That's not leadership, Mr. Bannon. That's betrayal." The studio was a vacuum of sound. Even the crew, hardened by years of political shouting matches, stood frozen, some with mouths agape. Bannon's eyes darted, searching for an escape, but Crockett's facts were a cage. She leaned forward, her voice steady but piercing. "So, please, Mr. Bannon, tell the American people, which one of us has spent their life serving others? Which one of us has a documented history of lying to and profiting off the very people they claim to fight for?" The silence that followed was deafening. Bannon's mouth twitched, his hands trembling visibly. For the first time in his decades-long career, the master of spin had no retort. His usual arsenal, deflections, attacks, outrage, was useless against Crockett's relentless evidence. The audience waited, breathless, as seconds ticked by. Bannon's face cycled through white, red, white again, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Finally, he managed a weak croak. You're taking it out of context." His voice was barely audible, lacking all its earlier fire. It was the stammer of a man who'd been outmaneuvered, his confidence shattered. "Out of context," Crockett repeated, her tone one of genuine surprise, though her eyes gleamed with the certainty of victory. "These are court records, Mr. Bannon. Your convictions, your arrests, your own statements and legal filings. These are facts reported by every major news outlet, including ones you've praised. How is a federal conviction out of context? How is defrauding supporters out of context?" Michael Sanders, sensing the historic weight of the moment, tried to give Bannon a lifeline. "Mr. Bannon, do you have a response to these allegations about your record?" he asked, his voice careful but tinged with awe at what he'd just witnessed. Bannon stared at the table, his hands shaking, his usual bluster gone. He muttered something about liberal media and gotcha tactics, but it was incoherent, a shadow of his typical bravado. The man who'd built a career on never backing down was reduced to a stammering shell, defeated not by volume, but by truth. Crockett looked at him for a moment, then turned to the camera, her expression calm but resolute. "I think Mr. Bannon's silence says it all," she said. When faced with facts about his record, when asked to defend his actions instead of his reputation, he has nothing to say. The American people deserve better. They deserve leaders who debate with evidence, who fight for policies that lift up families, and who own their actions. No excuses, no deflections. The audience erupted in applause, a wave of sound that filled the studio. Some stood, clapping fiercely. Others held up phones, capturing the moment. Even the crew, usually stoic, nodded in admiration. Crockett gathered her papers with the calm efficiency of someone who just completed a necessary task. Bannon, meanwhile, slumped further in his chair, staring blankly at the table, his defeat etched into every line of his posture. Sanders, recognizing the moment's gravity, wrapped the segment with a nod to Crockett's performance. "Representative Jasmine Crockett, thank you for joining us tonight," he said, his voice warm with respect. "This has been a remarkable discussion." As the cameras pulled back, the contrast was stark. Crockett, upright, composed, organizing her documents with quiet confidence. Bannon, hunched, defeated, avoiding eye contact. The image burned into the minds of viewers, a visual testament to the power of preparation over bluster, facts over fiction, service over self-interest. The CNN studio lights dimmed as the segment ended, but the energy in the room lingered like static after a storm. Representative Jasmine Crockett had just delivered a political masterclass, leaving Steve Bannon, a titan of divisive rhetoric, speechless and exposed. The audience's applause still echoed, a thunderous affirmation of what they'd witnessed. A young black congresswoman from Texas had taken down a seasoned strategist with nothing but facts, preparation, and unyielding resolve. As the cameras cut away, the impact of this confrontation rippled outward, setting the stage for a seismic shift in the political landscape. Within minutes, social media ignited. The hashtag #CrockettCrushesBannon surged to the top of trending lists, not just in the United States, but worldwide. Clips of the debate spread like wildfire across platforms. The moment when Bannon fell silent, his face drained of color as Crockett laid out his fraud convictions, racked up over 3 million views in the first hour alone. On TikTok, users stitched the clip with triumphant music, turning Crockett's calm takedown into viral anthems. Instagram feeds overflowed with screenshots of Bannon's stunned expression, captioned with phrases like, "when facts hit harder than fiction." Even LinkedIn buzzed with analysts praising Crockett's command of data and poise under pressure. Political leaders reacted swiftly, their responses revealing the fault lines of America's discourse. Democratic figures, some of whom had once viewed Crockett's boldness with caution, now hailed her as a rising star. House Leader Marcus Ellison tweeted moments after the broadcast, "This is what leadership looks like." Representative Jasmine Crockett just showed how to hold power accountable with truth. A masterclass. Progressive voices like Representatives Lena Torres and Aisha Malik, whom Bannon had derided as part of a radical clique, rallied behind her. Torres' viral post read, "They try to silence us with lies." Jasmine Crockett answered with receipts. "This is how we fight back." Surprisingly, even some across the aisle acknowledged Crockett's prowess. Anonymous Republican strategists, speaking to outlets like The Hill, admitted she'd outmaneuvered Bannon. One veteran GOP consultant said, "I've never seen Bannon that unprepared. She did her homework. He didn't." That's a wake-up call for everyone. Conservative media, typically quick to defend Bannon, was uncharacteristically subdued. Primetime hosts on right-leaning networks avoided the debate entirely, pivoting to unrelated stories. One prominent commentator offered only a vague remark: all public figures should answer for their records. The silence spoke volumes. Crockett's office was inundated within hours. Congressional colleagues called to congratulate her. Major networks, NBC, MSNBC, even international outlets like BBC, requested interviews. Universities and civic groups sent speaking invitations, eager to hear from the woman who'd turned a debate into a defining moment. Her staff scrambled to manage the flood, while Crockett herself remained grounded, thanking her team and preparing for the next day's work. She knew this victory wasn't just hers. It was for the working families she'd fought for her entire career. Bannon's camp, meanwhile, was in chaos. His team canceled 3 planned podcast appearances the following day, citing scheduling conflicts. His social media, usually a torrent of posts and provocations, went dark for nearly 24 hours, an eternity for someone who thrived on constant noise. When he finally tweeted, it was a feeble jab at mainstream media bias, met with thousands of replies linking to debate clips and court records. His usual allies were quiet, unwilling or unable to defend him after such a public unraveling. The man who'd built a career on never admitting defeat was now dodging the spotlight, his myth of invincibility shattered. In the days that followed, the debate's impact deepened. Newsrooms replayed the confrontation, with pundits dissecting Crockett's strategy, her refusal to take Bannon's bait, her command of data, her ability to turn his attacks into openings. Political science professors began assigning the clip in classes, calling it a textbook example of evidence-based discourse. Grassroots organizers, inspired by Crockett's fearlessness, launched voter registration drives in her name, targeting working-class communities like the ones she'd championed as a public defender. The contrast between the two figures' trajectories was stark. Crockett's profile soared, her speeches drawing record crowds. She used the platform to push her legislative priorities: infrastructure, jobs, healthcare access, criminal justice reform, tying every appearance back to the people she served. Her authenticity resonated, cutting through the cynicism that often plagued politics. Supporters mailed letters, some handwritten, thanking her for showing what leadership could be. One, from a single mother in Dallas, read, "You fought for us tonight. I saw it. Keep going." Bannon, on the other hand, retreated. His media appearances dwindled, his influence waning as allies distanced themselves. The New York State charges tied to his fraud case loomed larger, with prosecutors citing the debate as evidence of his pattern of deception. His base, once fiercely loyal, fractured. Some clung to his narrative, but others, stung by Crockett's revelations, began questioning his motives. The man who'd weaponized division found himself a casualty of his own tactics, undone by a woman who refused to play his game. Months later, the debate remained a touchstone. It was more than a viral moment. It was a turning point in how Americans viewed political accountability. Crockett's performance inspired a new wave of candidates, young, diverse, unafraid, who ran on platforms of truth and service. They cited her as proof that preparation and principle could triumph over bluster and lies. Political analysts called it the Crockett effect, a shift towards substance over spectacle in public discourse. For Crockett, the victory was bittersweet. She knew the fight wasn't over. The forces Bannon represented, division, misinformation, self-interest, were wounded but not gone. She returned to Congress with renewed focus, drafting bills, meeting constituents, and mentoring young activists. Her office walls filled with photos from the campaign trail, reminders of why she fought. One, taken after the debate, showed her smiling with her staff, their exhaustion outweighed by pride. Bannon, meanwhile, faded into the margins. His once loud voice grew faint, drowned out by the consequences of his actions. He'd underestimated Crockett, assuming his old tricks would work forever. But she'd shown the world what happened when truth met lies head-on. The image of Bannon, slumped in his chair, contrasted with Crockett, poised and triumphant, became iconic, a symbol of a new era where facts could still prevail. As the dust settled, America grappled with the debate's lessons. It wasn't just about two people. It was about the kind of country they wanted. Crockett's vision of unity, accountability, and service gained ground, not because it was loud, but because it was real. And in that reality, a young Congresswoman from Texas had carved out a legacy. One debate, one fact, one fearless moment at a time.